I think because the way the CBA is structured right now, we can't participate in equity. And that's a big deal because, you know, it is a partnership with ownership. It's a partnership with the league. And we're on the short term of that revenue, right? Like, those numbers sound crazy, but what the league is doing from whatever area you want to compare it to now is probably, 10x.
The WNBA thought it had survived the foul, the ejection, and the social media chaos. Then Steph Curry's name entered the conversation, and suddenly this basketball storm looked much bigger. DiJonai Carrington's hit on Sophie Cunningham had sent fans into detective mode, replaying every angle like unpaid FBI agents. But what happened after the whistle is where things get wild, because one reaction turned a brutal foul into a controversy nobody seems ready to drop.
Again, Stephanie White has made comments on the fact that she did not back her own players after the DiJonai Carrington clothesline from hell incident the other day, in which she came out and said, "Oh, DiJonai's she's not a dirty player. She just plays real hard. Blah, 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 blah." I mean, look, she turns into...
There's a strange irony sitting at the center of women's basketball right now, and it has nothing to do with box scores or standings. The most talked about moment of the WNBA season did not come from a buzzer beater or a playoff clinching victory. Instead, it came from a controversy that exploded far beyond the basketball court, dominating headlines, social media discussions, and sports talk shows across the country. What should have been another chapter in a long season quickly became one of the most debated stories in the league, drawing attention from fans, analysts, former players, and even people who rarely follow women's basketball at all.
Carrington was ejected from the game against the Indiana Fever for a little scuffle with Sophie Cunningham. And my analysis is, at least we know the refs work. Hey, we've been asking this whole time for the refs to do something. They did something today. That's funny how, when the condition change, now the refs want to activate. Everybody want to get active. Listen, Sophie will be all right. She's strong. And DiJonai is already in the locker room on 3.
There's a strange irony at the center of women's basketball right now, and it has nothing to do with box scores or standings. The most talked about moment of the WNBA season didn't come from a buzzer beater or a playoff clinching win. It came from a foul, a reaction to that foul, and then a reaction to the reaction that pulled in one of the most respected voices in the history of the sport. When Steph Curry, a man who has spent nearly 2 decades absorbing hits from some of the toughest defenders basketball has ever seen, decided to speak up about how Sophie Cunningham has been treated on the court, he didn't just add his voice to the debate.
The game in a way that you want to play.
If the game hadn't moved out of the paint and gotten more on the perimeter, there'd be a lot of people playing like Shaq.
I was like, I think Steph Curry made the WNBA watchable.
Caitlin Clark, baby.
The way that Caitlin Clark was playing was a very digestible form of basketball. But now this girl out of nowhere is playing like Steph, and it was still...
Alyssa Thomas is devastated by this part of Cheryl Miller's perspective. When Cheryl Miller watched the footage of Alyssa Thomas shoving Caitlin Clark from behind while Clark was still trying to recover after being poked in the eye, she reacted immediately. As one of the few people in basketball history who truly understands what elite competitive fire looks like, Miller has battled legendary opponents throughout her career. Yet even she believed Thomas's actions crossed a line when it came to sportsmanship and competitive integrity. What stood out most to Miller was the timing of the shove. The basketball icon raised a point that many fans have been thinking about, but few people with her level of credibility were willing to say publicly. Taking cheap shots at a player who is exposed and not looking is not the same thing as playing championship-level defense. Miller emphasized that she competed during one of the most physically demanding eras in women's basketball, but when players had a problem with each other, they faced one another directly instead of acting like predators when someone's back was turned. That, according to Miller, is exactly what made Alyssa Thomas's actions so troubling.
In the deck, and WNBA players and their fans stay playing that race card. Mistaking star power for racial prejudice is not only counterproductive, but extremely pathetic. DiJonai Carrington committed a hard foul at Sophie Cunningham and was correctly ejected from the game, but then decided the best thing to do for her cause is to run to the locker room and tweet out white privilege. I'm sorry, this isn't about race like some love to make it all about. It's about status. It's not.
During a Chicago Sky matchup, DiJonai Carrington caught Sophie Cunningham across the neck with a play that officials eventually upgraded to a flagrant foul. The contact came at a particularly vulnerable moment, just after Cunningham had taken a finger to the eye and was still trying to regain her bearings. What happened next is the part that turned a hard foul into a full-blown storyline. Cunningham did not back down. She got right into Carrington's space, and suddenly a physical basketball play became a flashpoint for everything fans had been quietly discussing all season about how the league's most marketable stars are treated once the ball is live. So when Curry called what happened to Cunningham the most cowardly act he had seen on a basketball court in decades, it was not the outrage of someone unfamiliar with contact. It was the assessment of someone who has lived through decades of it and still recognized this as something entirely different. The distinction Curry drew was simple but pointed. There is a difference between playing someone tough, contesting a shot, fighting through a screen, and clipping someone across the neck while their attention is elsewhere.
You told me about this.
Yeah, so the thing that like really caught my eye is she put on like Twitter something like white privilege.
She can do that?
So she pulled
in the WNBA?
She pulled the race card.
Oh
my whole thing is that's a dirty play. They need to make an example because they don't.
According to Curry, the era he came up in was considered one of the most physically demanding stretches in NBA history. And even then, the code was that you faced your opponent. You did not wait for someone's back to turn or their guard to drop before making your move. In his view, that is what separates hard-nosed competition from something that crosses into dangerous territory. And it is exactly where he placed Carrington's foul on Cunningham. What escalated the situation even further was not just the foul itself, but everything that followed. Rather than simply accepting the criticism and moving on, the controversy continued to grow. Curry argued that the players who reach the very top of their sport are the ones who take accountability when their actions cross a line, and avoiding that responsibility often creates even more scrutiny. It is worth noting that Carrington herself later offered a more measured perspective, acknowledging that it was a hard foul, saying she did not believe it was intentional, and admitting that the flagrant call was probably the correct decision.
Pretty quickly with a lot of people. At least with me, she does. The moment I realize she's going to do it again and not back her own player, yeah, I'm out. I got to tell you, one of the most obvious traits of a terrible leader, not taking any responsibility for your actions. And in a business that requires people to consume and be a...
She's also made clear that her style of play has always been aggressive, the kind where nobody gets an easy layup against her, and that this is simply part of how she competes. That version of events exists alongside the firestorm, and it is part of what has made this story so complicated. On one side, you have people describing a competitor who plays with relentless physicality. On the other, you have those who see a pattern of behavior that appears to target some of the league's most visible and marketable players. Because this is not the first time Carrington's name has come up in connection with Caitlin Clark either, and that history is a major reason this latest incident spread so quickly. Neither incident resulted in a foul call, but both became part of a growing collection of clips that fans began stitching together. Once that pattern became attached to the name DiJonai Carrington, it became almost impossible for any new hard foul involving her to be viewed in isolation. This is where Curry's argument evolved from a single incident into something much bigger about the direction of the league as a whole.
There's flagrant twos in basketball in the WNBA. This is a totally fine reaction, I think, to a play like that. And maybe the story ends there if Carrington doesn't go to the locker room, pick up her phone, and tweet white privilege, which is insane. An absolutely insane thing to say. Now, if you go watch other networks, I'm not going to say it on Fox, but ESPN's filled with absolute morons. Absolutely have a...
His concern was not just about one flagrant foul or one heated exchange under the basket. It was about the message that gets sent if plays like this go unpunished. If the league allows certain players to consistently target its brightest stars without meaningful consequences, It creates an incentive structure that rewards the wrong things. Instead of players working to develop the skill, footwork, and basketball IQ needed to compete with someone like Cunningham, the message becomes that they can simply find ways to disrupt her physically and stay relevant that way. Curry framed this as a dangerous precedent, one that could actively discourage players who are trying to elevate their game and raise the overall level of competition in the league. Young athletes are constantly absorbing lessons about how the game is supposed to be played, what kind of conduct gets celebrated, and what kind of conduct gets punished. If the takeaway from a widely discussed incident is that targeting a star player earns a suspension-free path to relevance, that is a lesson Curry clearly believes has no place in a sport built on skill, preparation, and sportsmanship.
Sophie Cunningham has a popular national podcast. She is a star, so her visibility creates dollars and spotlight for the WNBA. And the WNBA is correctly protecting that asset from a player who has a history of reckless and aggressive play. And that foul merited an ejection. Carrington calling it white privilege is doing the exact opposite of helping. And yes, clout always wins in sports, like it or not. It's still a business, and people with a platform will always get protection from the media. But to me, this was way more simple than that. So stop mistaking.
Underneath all of this analysis sits Curry's genuine appreciation for what Sophie Cunningham actually brings to the floor. He reportedly sees in her some of the same traits that defined his own game: an advanced basketball IQ, an ability to make shots when the pressure is at its highest, and a knack for making the players around her better simply by being on the court. That is high praise coming from someone who built a Hall of Fame career on those exact qualities. But it is paired with a real concern, because Curry seems to believe that instead of Cunningham being allowed to simply develop and showcase that potential, she is too often forced to deal with unnecessary physical play. Rather than putting in the extra film study, extra reps, and extra conditioning needed to compete at that level, some players choose the shortcut of making the game uncomfortable, or even dangerous for their opponents. In Curry's view, that is exactly what makes moments like the Cunningham incident so troubling, because they represent everything that undermines the integrity of competitive basketball rather than elevating it.
Idiotic mindset that many Black Americans still have today, and many Black people view everything through a racial lens. This girl almost took Sophie Cunningham's head off. And then when she got ejected for doing something that she should not have done and that she absolutely should have got ejected for, she's gonna go in the locker room and tweet on Threads, white privilege. At the beginning of this video, you can see her tweet at the bottom. No, sweet, it's not white privilege. That's called being treated fairly. I would bet you money the reason
She also placed Cunningham's experience within the much larger burden that comes with being one of the most visible faces in the sport. At just 24 years old, Cunningham is not only dealing with the normal grind of a professional basketball season. She is dealing with a level of scrutiny that many veterans never experience over an entire career. It comes with being positioned, whether she asked for it or not, as one of the most recognizable names helping drive the league's current surge in popularity. Every highlight gets dissected. Every mistake gets amplified. Every hard foul against her becomes a headline within hours. On the other side of the equation, the league risks allowing rougher and less disciplined tactics against those same players to go unchecked, potentially discouraging the very stars who are helping generate record ratings, packed arenas, and a wave of new fans discovering women's basketball for the first time. According to Curry, the direction the league chooses from here is not a minor issue. It is a decision that could help shape the future of the WNBA for years to come.
I think so. I think that they should have, ejected her because she didn't make a play on a ball.
Okay.
Now, if she would have hit the ball while, doing this, they might would have, gave her a flagrant foul 1. But being as though she didn't even come in contact with the ball, it was all head and neck and shoulder. We got to get you out of here. We got to get you out of here. Because it's not that serious. These are women.
Yeah, it's like when you're watching men and they get physical.
Yeah, I mean,
it's different.
None of this exists in a vacuum either, because the timing could not be more significant. The WNBA is in the middle of the biggest growth period in its history, with television ratings climbing, social media engagement exploding, and a level of mainstream attention that simply did not exist just a few years ago. That growth cuts both ways, though. It means incidents like this do not stay confined to a single arena or fan base. They spread instantly, get dissected from every angle, and become part of a much larger conversation about how the league is perceived by people who are only now tuning in. Nobody is asking for the game to be softened or for rivalries to disappear, because those rivalries are part of what makes the sport compelling in the first place. But there is a difference between hard-nosed defense and plays that place a player's safety at genuine risk. How officials call games, how the league handles fines and suspensions, and how consistently those standards are applied will play a major role in shaping the next chapter of WNBA history. Through it all, Cunningham herself has taken the approach that many of her supporters point to as the reason they respect her in the first place.
They don't even mention the fact that she said white privilege. That is the story. The story isn't that she got kicked out. It's that she tweeted out white privilege as though because Sophie Cunningham is white, somehow that's why she got kicked out. They go on to defend her, the story, the narrative that she's not a dirty player.
All I can say is if you are posting during the game, is my understanding, it doesn't take a genius to connect the two together. Sure, it's very vague, and that's kind of the criticism.
She hasn't used press conferences to escalate the drama or turn this into a prolonged public back and forth. Instead, she has continued showing up, continued competing, and allowed her play on the court to speak for itself. In a strange way, that has only added more weight to Curry's argument. The contrast between a player absorbing what many view as unfair treatment while still performing at a high level and a league still trying to determine how to respond creates exactly the kind of tension that keeps this story from fading into the background. Where all of this goes from here remains genuinely uncertain. What is clear is that the conversation Curry ignited is not going to disappear quietly because it touches on something much bigger than a single foul or a single flagrant call. It touches on how the WNBA chooses to protect the players who are helping carry the league into its most visible era yet, and whether the sport's rapid growth will be matched by an equally serious commitment to safeguarding the talent making that growth possible in the first place.